Well, good morning. Now, in yesterday's class, we were talking about some professional dilemma, two important professional dilemma we had seen yesterday. One was conflict of interest and the second was whistleblowing. Now, in today's class, first of all, we will talk about some more topics related to the ethics in governance, and then after the rest of the day, we will devote to the case studies. That how can we use all these ideas that we have discovered in our class till now, we can use that in order to answer a good case study. So, before that, let's talk about some of the important ideas. First important idea that we'll talk about is, write down further, code of conduct. Code of conduct. Now, write down firstly a few lines. Code of conduct is a code of conduct is a set of rules. Code of conduct is a set of rules that regulates and controls, a set of rules that regulates and controls the behavior of, civil servants, and which a civil servant is which a civil servant is obliged to follow. Which a civil servant is obliged to follow. Any violation of these code of conduct, may be punished. Any violation of these code of conducts may be punished. Now, that is how we can define the code of conduct. But before that, let me take two questions that has been asked. Biswajit, first of all, sir, in Haryana current situation, is there any ethical dilemma or just it is provoked by the communal violence? Biswajit. Biswajit, it is basically a communal violence provoked by the, situation provoked by some maybe vested interest. It appears to us. We do not have much information what happened on the ground. Since we do not have much information what happened on the ground, we should not jump to the conclusion what happened there. It is an unfortunate set of events, and well, it does appear that there is some communal conflagration was there, some provocation was there from both the sides. So, there is not much ethical dilemma unless and until we understand the whole situation on the ground. So, that is what. Another question Nimai has asked is, sir, I think there is a topic called aptitude that needs to be covered from psychology part. Nimai, as I told you, I hope you remember, in my class, last class after leadership, I had told you that aptitude is a part, we have covered aptitude as a part of emotional intelligence. So, most of the things that we have discussed in our emotional intelligence, they are the aptitude for civil service as well, like compassion or diversity or empathy, or many other earlier things like fortitude or perseverance or optimism or commitment. So, these are all aptitude for civil service. So, aptitude I told you in the introduction class also and towards the end of the leadership also that we will not cover aptitude separately. It is just a part of emotional intelligence. Okay, sir, good. Next question was that what is ethical hacking? Please give some concept. Ethical hacking, ethical hacking is basically anything when you add ethical, then the idea of ethics is always with the good intention. Remember, we often consider ethics as a part of the deontological theory, intention. So, when hacking is done with the good intention, then that can be called ethical hacking. What can be the good intention? First of all, a good intention can be to show the weakness of the system. to show the weakness of the system is weak, for example, there is some, you can say, loophole in the system, then by hacking us, we can make the system administrator to understand that there is a problem in your system, which can be manipulated by the unscrupulous elements in the society. So ethical hacking is basically hacking for the sake of good purpose, with good intention for good purpose. So that is so anywhere you can say when there is ethical word that is added into ethical hacking, ethical anything else for that matter, then it is just about doing certain act like hacking in this case with good intention, having good for the sake of good consequence. Both of them, consequentialist argument for good consequence and deontological argument that with a good intention. So that is what we call the ethical hacking. Then after you can go into what makes it ethical, what can be the other purpose for hacking. Now let's come back to the code of conduct. Now code of conduct, as we had seen that definition here, that code of conduct is a set of rules. It is a set of rules, or you can say rules, which guides the behavior of the civil servant, which regulates the behavior of the civil servant. So at the name itself tells us code of conduct. Conduct means behavior, code means rules, rules of behavior. So as you will see shortly that there are a number of rules are there which every civil servant is expected to follow while doing their public duty or even in their private life, as we will see in some detail shortly. Now code of conduct, we can say as of now, just one small thing further, that code of conduct is a legally enforceable thing. So it is a so if anybody violates code of conduct, then there is a provision of punishment for that. Punishment might be given to the person for such violation. So that is how we define code of conduct normally, legally enforceable, punishable rules of behavior which every civil servant is obliged to follow. Now ethically speaking, you can imagine here that code of conduct is a little controversial topic from ethical point of view. What is controversial? Because controversy here is that code of conduct is basically an attempt to what we can call legislate morality. So in this case we can say legislate morality. So in this case code of conduct, what we do, that we are trying to make a law rule for morality, what is right and what is wrong behavior. And this idea of legislating about the morality is a highly controversial idea in the modern ethics. Can you tell me, for example, that which theory of ethics that we have discussed in our class will say that legislating morality is completely wrong? It is unjustified, we should not legislate on morality. I hope that most of you should be able to answer this question. It will be talked about by the libertarian philosophers. Libertarianism. So libertarianism will say that the morality should not be legislated. There should not be any law on morality. Morality must be the domain of an individual. Let individual decide what is right and wrong for them. Let state not interfere into that. But by making a code of conduct, the state is interfering into the behavior of the civil servants. So you can say that is a libertarian point of view, it is a controversial. But there is another important theory of ethics which says that morality must be legislated. Can you tell me which theory of ethics that we have discussed in our class will say that morality must be legislated? I hope that you can think of it. Well, it will be the virtue theory. So virtue theory will say that morality must be legislated. So there are two important aspects are there, two important theoretical perspectives are there about the idea of legislating on morality. Libertarians will be strongly against that and virtue thinkers are strongly in favor of that. But as we have seen in our philosophy class earlier, that our modern society today, we are moving from a virtue-based theory to the liberty-based society. Liberty is becoming more and more important with the passing days. Because of that, you can see that this code of conduct has become more controversial in the more recent time when the ideas of liberty has become more prominent, more influential in the modern society. So that is the controversy here, should we legislate morality or not? So it is a controversial topic, but even then, at least for civil service, we believe that, well, it is important for us, us to make and have a code of conduct. There are many reasons for that. Complexity of the work, money is involved, power is involved, the public good is involved. Because of all those factors, we cannot allow the civil servants to act on the basis of impulse or feelings in a way. We must make the civil servant also act on the basis of the similar, we can say, certain code of conduct. Because of that reason, that you know that in our constitution, the article 309 of our constitution has a provision that the president can make, of course through parliament, president can make a code of conduct for civil service. And under that article, in 1964, the parliament passed a law that is known as CCSCR, Central Civil Service Conduct Rules of 1964, which consist of the most important code of conduct who should be, can say, code of conduct for central civil service, which every civil service, central civil servant is expected to follow. We have a similar code of conduct for all India service also and all the state service also. For example, what is the difference between, do you know what is the difference between the all India service and the central civil service? I hope that you might be aware of that. The civil service examination that you are preparing for, there are two types of services are there: all India service, IAS and IPS. There is a third one also for which a separate examination is conducted, Indian Forest Service. Now, all India services are the ones in which the appointment is made by the central government through UPSC, but the people work under, officers work under the state government. They are allotted a state cadre and they work under the state government, and throughout their career they will work within the boundary of that state itself, except when they go on central deputation or otherwise. So otherwise you can say they will be posted, they can be transferred only within the state. So they are appointed by the central government, but they work under the state government. They are a very important chain of for federalism in our country. IAS and IPS in your exam are the two important all India service. Central civil service, on the other hand, they are those services in which officers are appointed by the central government through UPSC and they work under the central government. So officers working under central civil service, they can be transferred anywhere in the country. There is no limitation that where they can be posted, where they can be transferred. So rest of the service that you have in your exam, they are all central civil service. So Parliament passed a law in 1964 that is about the central civil service conduct rules. Today you can say, but similar code of conduct is there for most of the, you can say most of the state services also and central all India service as well. Let us briefly talk about some of the important code of conduct for civil service in India. That will give you some idea about the nature of civil service in India as well. But more importantly, it will also help you to write many case studies also, because you can use these code of conduct as a part of your case study, which we will see later on today itself. So that is the one. Let us talk about what are these code of conduct. So write down further. The code of conduct for civil service in India . Code of conduct for civil service in India involve the following. Now, before we talk about the following, let me take one question. I think Vidisha has asked a question, Vidisha Sarkar. Sir, A murdered B being influenced by C. So here, who should be punished, A or C? Of course, Vidisha, ethics tells us, law also tells us A should be punished, because A is the person who has conducted the wrong act. Remember that in a modern ethics, normally we consider act as wrong or right. So anybody who performs the act, that person alone should be, you can say, should be punished here. See, influenced by, as far as that is concerned, then people can be influenced by anybody. We can be influenced by Mahatma Gandhi also, we can be influenced by Buddha also. So the many people, you can say, followers of Buddha also committed a lot of atrocities, say that they are following Buddhism. For example, you can say in Myanmar, for example, many Buddhists have actually, or in Sri Lanka also. So influence, how can you say that influence can be the reason for punishment? So terrorists may be influenced by Quran. Can you say that Quran should be punished? Of course not. So influence is not important characters. The act is more important one. Action is the more important one. So anybody who performs the action is morally responsible for performing that action. So in this case, A is responsible, not C. Now, let us talk about some of the important code of conduct. Write down further. First one, apolitical function. Just one line you can write here. I will talk about in brief, most of these code of conduct, some important one at least. Write down further. A civil servant should not participate. A civil servant should not participate in any political activity. A civil servant should not participate in any political activity. Now, that is the first important thing. As we will see shortly that in many of these code of conduct, the many fundamental right also that normal citizen of India have, that will be denied to the civil servant, that will be deprived. Civil servants will be deprived of that. So, first important right that you have to give up once you become a civil servant is the political rights. So, civil servant cannot participate in any political activities, like for example, a civil servant cannot join a political party, he cannot canvass for a political party, he cannot canvass for a political candidate, he cannot give donation to the political party or political candidate, he cannot even participate in a political function, political rally for example. He can go in the political function as a civil servant to manage the crowd for example or arrangement etc. but not as a participant. He cannot participate in a rally and can clap for a leader. So, clapping for a leader as a participant, as a can say the part of the crowd maybe, that will be violation of a code of conduct. A civil servant should keep away from any political activity. Only political act that he can engage in is, of course, you can think of it that a civil servant can vote. Voting. So, you can vote for it, that is a basic fundamental political rights, democratic rights. So, he can vote for somebody, but you cannot ask somebody else to vote for your candidate, because that will be equivalent to canvassing. That will become wrong. So, a civil servant cannot participate in any such political activity. So, idea here is that the civil service in India is envisaged as an apolitical civil service. There should not be any political affiliation that the civil servants should have, because a civil servant has to work under various government. Today you have to work under Narendra Modi also for example, and tomorrow you may have to work under some other prime minister. Yesterday you might be working under Dr. Manmohan Singh also. So, a civil servant cannot have a political affiliation, attitude strong. As you have seen in our yesterday's class, we have seen that some people have very strong political opinion. I, for example, have a very strong political opinion that I might be very strongly against the right wing or can say political parties, etc. So, thank you. So, as a private citizen, it is okay for me to have a strong political opinion, to be against a particular prime minister, to be against a political party. But you as a civil servant should not be like that. So, suppose for example, as we have seen yesterday that this was the line of attitude. In this case, extreme supporter and extreme opponent. So, it is okay for me to be extremely against some political ideology, political party, or I can support also some political party very strongly again. That is okay, that's my political right. But you as a civil servant should not have. Your attitude towards the political issues must be near the center rather than towards the pole. So, we will suggest here that if you have a strong political opinion like this for example, then you should try to moderate your political opinion. Try to keep yourself away from the political activities as much as you possibly can. That will make your life and career much smooth. So, that is one important thing that will make you to work with various government in the, various government in the country in a way, without any trouble, without any conflict, without any internal disturbance and all. The question was Madan Saha, sir, IAS, IPS as well as the state civil service officers should not participate in any political. Yes, as I told you that these code of conduct for all civil services there. So, normally it is from the CCSCR that I am taking in the class, but similar code of conduct is applicable for all every state civil service as well as the IAS, IPS or central civil service, every civil service should never be participating in any political act. They must be apolitical, they must be politically neutral. This political neutrality is often we call as non-partisanship. So they must be non-partisan. They should not be in, can say, in a political partisan this side or that side. They must be neutral in terms of their political affiliation, political, well, opinions or attitude, etc. That is one important thing. Second important thing is, write down, they should not criticize any existing policies of the government. They should not criticize any existing policies of the government. So that is the next important thing. The idea is that, as we have seen in our yesterday's class, that or maybe in the previous class also, that civil servants, the idea of the bureaucracy is that policy must be made by the government, legislator and the can say government, and the civil servant must only implement it. So the idea of the civil service is as implementer of the policy rather than the judge of a policy. So a civil servant should not make a judgment about a policy, whether the policy is good and bad. Whatever policy is given to him, it is his duty to ensure that he should implement that policy. So for this reason, he is expected not to criticize any policies. What is the problem if he criticizes it? If he criticizes the policies of the government, then he will be going against the value of leadership that we have discussed in our class. That a good leader must have a strong conviction about their goal and method. But if you criticize something, then you are criticizing something on the one hand and you are trying to implement doing the same thing. That will weaken your conviction, that will weaken your leadership ability. So a civil servant must always try to find out the good things in a policy and try to talk positively about it rather than criticizing it. So if there is something wrong in a policy, then internal channel can be used to give a feedback to the government if the bureaucracy allows. But otherwise, they should not practice, they should not be critical to the government policies. Before next, let me take a question. Nimai has asked the question. Sir, today it is seen that many politicians make his daughter's son get married to a civil servant, and thus many civil servants come under politics. Sir, please say something about it. Nimai, that is a fact that sometimes it does happen that the many politicians, but that will create a conflict of interest. That we'll talk about in some later part also. But that may possibly create a conflict of interest. A civil servant should try to avoid that. As I told you yesterday also, because if you become, I can say, your spouse is a politician, then after that will create a conflict of opinion. You must keep yourself away from that. If you remember, a few years ago, Arvind Kejriwal, the Chief Minister of Delhi then also, his wife was an IRS officer. And I have seen that in many interviews when during the Delhi election or Lok Sabha election, for example, many we can say TV channels, they had gone there, in his home to interview him. He is a political personality. But his wife had never come in front of that person in a way. Or for example, many such examples you can find out here, that first time when he had won the Delhi election with a landslide victory, then after, first time when he appeared in his balcony to greet Arvind Kejriwal, to greet his supporters there, then his wife also accompanied him. And he told the crowd that I have to do a lot of effort to convince my wife that it is the greatest occasion of my life. So please come with me in public once. And he suggested that I will, request the government not to take any action against you for that. Well, that was a violation of conduct. Even to be seen with your husband or wife who is a politician in public, some public function like this one might be a violation of code of conduct. So government may choose not to take an action. In this case, perhaps no action was taken, but that was a violation of a code of conduct. That it was a political function when a politician is trying to greet their supporters for an election victory, and a civil servant as a wife is accompanying him. That was a violation of code of conduct. So the idea is that a civil servant, even if their spouse is in the politics, then they should publicly at least keep away from any political activity with a spouse. So if a spouse is invited in a political function, for example, then the civil servant should not go there. That may be a violation of code of conduct. So that distance must be maintained. That is an important part of code of conduct further. So that is the second one, no criticism of the policies of the government. Third very important code of conduct is, write down further, they must provide information. They must provide information about to the public about the issues of they must provide information, relevant information rather. They must provide the relevant information to the public about the issues of public interest in a fair, active and timely manner. In a fair, active and timely manner. They can restrict information, write down further, they can restrict information only when it is explicitly required by a law. Only when they are explicitly required by a law. So the idea here is that a civil servant will have many information with him or her about the relevant issues, public interest issues. But these information are information of the public, and public has a right to know these information. So a civil servant must provide all these information that they have about the issues of public interest to the public, put that in public domain, particularly in a fair manner. It means fair means what? A complete disclosure, not a partial disclosure. Secondly, well, active manner. Active means even if nobody is asking you about that information, then also it is your duty as a civil servant to put that information in public domain. Active manner. And thirdly, well, timely manner, as soon as possible. That if information is provided today and you actually reveal that information after say 5 years maybe, or 5-6 months maybe, that will be untimely disclosure. It must be disclosed as soon as possible. They can hide some information, of course, but only when it is explicitly required by a law. If they are denying some information to the public, then they must say that under what law that they are denying that information. By default, information must be given. Denial must be on the basis of a law. And most often, the law that is often used by the civil servant to deny the information is the infamous Official Secret Act. Official Secret Act of 1923. It was a colonial act which has a vast, can say, conditions or criteria on the basis of which information can be denied to the public. And civil servants often use this law to deny virtually any information to the public on the name of official secret. In order to handle this problem, the RTI, right to information, was brought up later on. So I hope that you have studied right to information in your paper 2 governance class also. So that right to information, RTI Act, that is important. And remember, even before RTI, it was the duty and obligation of a civil servant to give information to the public about public interest. That is the next one. Next, another one, I don't further. Only the authorized civil servant, should communicate on behalf of the public authority, with public and media. With public and media. So the idea is that every department of government again has some authorized official who can talk to the public and media. So if there is no authorization, the civil servant must not talk to the public about any issues. You must have heard very often that whenever some tragic case happens or some controversial case happens in the country, and if the media people chase a civil servant to ask some information, then they simply say that I am not authorized to talk to you on this matter. So the idea is that they can use, civil servant must use this clause to say that I have that information, but I am not authorized. They don't have to lie. They can only say that I am not authorized to talk to you on this issue. So through that it is easier. So because of this code of conduct, it will be easier for a civil servant to act without any public pressure or public interaction in a way. So that is one important code of conduct that a civil servant is expected to follow. Next one, write down further. They should use the public resource they should use the public resource only during the official hours and only while performing the public duties relevant to the position that they hold. Public duties relevant to the position that they hold. Now, the idea is that civil servants are given lots of public resource, like a car, like a peon, for example, but they should use that public resource, only during the official hour, and even during that official hour, only for doing work that is relevant for the public purpose. You know, many of these code of conduct, as you may have thought already, is known more for its violation than for its adherence. This is one of them. So civil servants often flaunt their public resource, like that red light car, for example, or they often use they use the car as a private car. Maybe sometimes they use the the official peon as a personal servant at home also to bring vegetables from the market or something like this one. So civil servants should not do any of that. That will be a violation of code of conduct. So if a resource is given, it is for the official purpose and during the official hours, and they should use only for that purpose and during those hours. That is a requirement of a civil servant further. Next one, write down further. They should neither accept nor request. They should neither accept nor request any gift or favor either for themselves or on behalf of someone else. Either for themselves or on behalf of someone else. So that is the next important thing. The idea is that they should neither accept nor request. Even if it is unrequested, it is given to them, they should not accept any gift or favor, etc. Not only for themselves, but also on behalf of someone. They cannot simply say, I am taking this gift for somebody, well, on behalf of my friend or relative or a family member. No, they cannot also be the channel of acceptance of a gift by somebody. Well, of course, as we have seen yesterday about this, that if they accept a gift or favor like this one, it will create a conflict of interest for them. So that is one important. They should try to avoid any of it. But there is one small leverage is given to civil servants on that. Write down further. But they can accept some minor gifts but they can accept some minor gifts within the purview of conventional hospitality or politeness. Conventional hospitality and politeness. Now, that is the next important thing. The idea here is that civil servants also live within a society where there are certain rules of convention where we exchange. There are some rules of, you can say, conventional rules or situation, occasion, for example, on which we exchange gift with each other. So, that minor gift they can accept within the convention again. For example, on birthdays we exchange gift with each other. On anniversary we exchange gift with each other. That is normal convention. And civil servants are also part of a society where these conventions operate. So, they can accept these gifts again on your birthday, for example, but that must be a minor gift. So, nobody can give you cannot take a gift like, nobody should gift you a Mercedes car, for example, on your birthday. That is not a convention that we have in our society, that on birthdays we exchange with each other Mercedes car. That will be a violation of code of conduct. As of now, as far as I remember, it keeps on changing also. The value of this minor gift must be less than 5,000 rupees or so. So, they should try to, can say, avoid accepting any gift whose value is more than that. This is what the society or government has decided to be the, you can say, should be there. That is one important thing. There is a question, sir, affirmative criticism of policy should be allowed for the purpose of innovation, creativity, etc. Yes, it should be allowed, but in the case of civil service, it is not allowed. Criticism is not allowed at all. So, criticism can be done by such affirmative criticism can be done by the either public, media, intellectuals, opposition party, etc. Or civil service when they are in a higher position, where they are in the position of policy framing, for example. Then they can talk about that while framing the policy, not after the policy has been made. Or when there is a feedback is sought by the government about improvement. Sometimes the government does seek feedback from the civil servant about improving the policy, making it better. Then they can give it, but publicly they should not criticize the policies of the government as such. So, that is a gift. Next one, write down further. Next point. They should avoid any conflict of interest. They should avoid any conflict of interest. Any conflict of interest, write down further. Any conflict of interest must be resolved according to the law related to that conflict before the appointment. Before the appointment. This we had already talked about in yesterday's class, that a civil servant must avoid any conflict of interest. And if any conflict of interest exists as such, then he must always resolve that before he gets the appointment in such a manner according to certain law which is there to guide them how to resolve such a conflict of interest. Recusal can be one of the things. But other laws are also there that can help them. They should be aware of that, and they would be made aware of that during the training period, etc. And then after they can do that. So, that is one important thing that they should do. Next one, write down further. They should not write in newspapers or magazines. They should not write in the newspapers or magazines or give interview to the TV channels without the prior permission of their competent superior. Without the prior permission of their competent superiors. So that is another important thing. The idea here is that a civil servant should not, you can say, write in newspapers and all. If they, of course, they cannot, you can say, unless and until, well, they get the permission of a competent superior. So they cannot criticize the policies of the government by writing error. But even on non-political matters, for example, or even for the sake of explaining the advantage of the policy, they cannot write in the newspapers unless and until they get the permission for a competent authority. There is a competency decided who is competent enough to give you the permission. Only after they get the permission, they should be writing in the newspapers or magazines. Otherwise, they should keep away from the media, even while, well, giving interviews, etc., or writing or an article or something like this. That is one important thing. Next one, they should obey the orders and commands. They should obey the orders and commands given to them by their superiors, within their jurisdiction, and they should respect their seniors. That is one important thing. There is a question Braja has asked, if in wedding father-in-law gifts his son-in-law a Mercedes car, then he should, we need to avoid it. Braja, technically speaking, they should avoid it. Because, well, any type of gift, it is not minor, then that should be avoided. We will talk a little more about that in the next topic also here, in the same thing, one more code of conduct later. But they should avoid it even otherwise. Why so? I will take this question then also. Hold on. Now, these two are the very important. Obedience and respect are very important value of civil service. Obedience we had already seen in yesterday's class, that a civil servant must be much more obedient than the people working in any other private organization. So that is an important thing. Again, obedience is a very highly, we can say, value. If an order is given to a civil servant, then they must always follow. Only thing that they can do, now we often say here, that only thing that they can do is that if you think, for example, the order is unethical, then at maximum that you can do is to ask for a written order from your superior. But if there is a written order given to you by your superior that do this, then it is your duty that you must do it, without making a judgment whether you think that this order is right or wrong. So they must follow the order. Maximum that they can do is to ask for a written order. But apart from that, after that, well, they must always obey whatever order is given to them. They should obey. The obedience is a high value. Similarly, respect. That a civil servant must respect his or her seniors. Now, this is one of the most controversial code of conduct in the recent time. Because in many Western countries, America, US, for example, from where, UK, for example, from where many of these code of conducts have been taken by us, well, they had already given up this idea of respect as a code of conduct. Many people believe, libertarians particularly, that respect must come from inside. Respect cannot be imposed by law. You cannot force somebody to respect somebody else. But in India, we have this clause and very strictly implemented. In Europe, for example, or in America, for example, it is possible, it's okay for you as a civil servant to talk to your boss by calling his first name, Mr. ABC, for example. But in India, you cannot call your boss by Mr. ABC. You must address your boss by you can see the respectful address like sir or madam. I have seen many civil servant using the word sir twice in every sentence. Sir, this happened, sir. Madam, this happened, madam. So, sir and madam must be used, or other sign of respect must also be there, like your clothes must be formal, your demeanor must be formal. You cannot sit in front of your boss unless and until you take permission, even if the chair is empty. So, all of these are the sign of respect that they must always show. That is one important part of civil. You know, a few years ago, there was a controversy. I hope that you may remember that there was a young IAS officer was there in Madhya Pradesh somewhere, that he went to airport to receive the Prime Minister Narendra Modi wearing goggles on his eyes and t-shirt and jeans. Now, for this, he was, you can see, show cause notice was sent to him. It was found to be a violation of code of conduct, respect. Wearing goggles while talking to your senior was considered to be disrespectful. I don't know what happened after that, but an action was initiated. Show cause notice was sent to him that I heard last about that case. So that is the next important thing. So that is what they should do, respect their seniors. Next one, write on further. They cannot take any employment. They cannot take any employment or profession without the prior permission of the government, and they cannot accept any salaried position under any other employer. They cannot accept any salaried position under any other employer. So that is next important thing. The idea is that a civil servant cannot accept any other employment apart from any other employment. Like, for example, they cannot do a night shift job, they cannot do a online job, they cannot accept a weekend job, for example. So even in their rest of the private time, holiday or off period, for example, they cannot take a part-time job. So once they are civil servant, then they are 24/7 civil servants till the time they retire or till the time they resign. So that is a part of code of conduct in a way. They can go on deputation, but that must be with the permission of the government. And then after, salary must be routed through the government. They cannot work as a salaried person under any other employer. So as you can imagine that if they work somewhere else, it will essentially create a conflict of interest. Most of these code of conduct are basically an attempt to help them to handle avoid a conflict of interest. So if once they are civil servant, then they are 24/7 civil servant. They should not do any other work outside the purview of the civil servant. That is one important thing. Now in next code of conduct, I will try to sum up some of the economic restrictions on the civil servants, I can say in general, in one point. Write down for the next one. They cannot have any personal business. So that again, you can imagine it will create a conflict of interest. Having a personal business and doing civil service, that will create a huge conflict of interest. They cannot start a personal business. Many civil servants, I know that they have a business, they run that business in the name of their spouse, but still on their personal name, they cannot do that. Theoretically speaking, they should not do that even on the behalf of their spouse or anybody else. So civil servant cannot have a personal business, number one, comma. Write on further. They cannot engage in betting. They cannot engage in betting. Betting is normally also illegal in India for most of the cases, but in some cases it is allowed, like horse racing. But a civil servant should not engage in even otherwise legal betting activity and all. So they cannot engage in betting, comma, write down further. There are restrictions regarding the investment. There are restrictions regarding investment, lending and borrowing. Restrictions regarding investment, lending and borrowing, and sale purchase of immovable property. And sale purchase of immovable property. So that is another important problem, that the thing that they have. There are many restrictions. Investment, for example, they cannot make an investment even in share market, etc., without permission of the government. Or lending, they cannot lend the money. Of course, first of all, they should not have enough money to lend others. If they have enough money to lend others, then that will be a sign of unethical conduct, corruption. So, but even otherwise, if they lend money, then government must be informed about that. So there is a restriction about lending, borrowing. For example, if you are taking a loan from somebody, then that must be a structured system like banking rather than from private lenders and all. So they cannot borrow without, permission of the government, without informing the government about that. Sale purchase of immovable property, even if they inherit a land, for example, from their parents or an apartment, a building, etc., then they, while selling that, they must inform the government about that I am selling a land that I inherited from my parents maybe. So there are lots of restrictions regarding any of such economic activity in their private life also. Comma, write down further. They cannot declare insolvency. They cannot declare insolvency and they cannot declare insolvency and display habitual indebtedness. Habitual indebtedness. This is how we write indebtedness. And they cannot display habitual indebtedness. They cannot engage in habitual indebtedness display. So insolvency, you know that many businessmen often use insolvency as a way to handle the economic financial problem. But a civil servant cannot declare insolvency, they cannot declare bankruptcy. And habitual indebtedness. Some people become habitually indebted. It means basically that, well, a credit card is a good example of that. Some people, I have seen some of them, that they take a credit card, they keep on spending all of that, and when the credit card is full, then after, well, they take a second credit card, take a loan from the second one and keep on paying the minimum amount in the first one. And when the second is full, then third, and then fourth, and then after there is a huge pressure of the collection agent. Some people have committed suicide also because of the pressure of collection of the of the credit card, etc. Civil servants should not engage in such an activity. They should not be habitually indebted. Idea is that civil servants must learn to live within the known source of income that they have. They should try to limit their expenditure, their lifestyle, only till the point where their salary is enough to sustain that. Do not try to expand your expenditure or your lifestyle. They must have a sedentary lifestyles within the salary that they are given by the government. So they should not become habitually indebted for every need that they have. So these are some of the important economic restrictions on the activities of a civil servant. Then after there is some personalism, but before that let me see if there is a question that is relevant here. Subhashri has asked a question. Sir, we often found in newspapers that ex-civil servants and ex-military personnel are writing collectively against or in favor of some issues, like recent forest bill. Most of the cases, all those remained unheard. Does not it lower down the prestige of the post? Does not the present policy makers feel any need of paying heed to it ethically? First of all, Subhashri, three important points are there in your question. First of all, ex-civil servants are not bound by the code of conduct, so they can write against the government. And sometimes they do that again. It is their democratic right in a way. Number one. Number two, well, whether government is heeding them to or not, that is not very important. So remember, freedom of speech is not about freedom of to be heard. So there is a difference between freedom to speak and freedom to be heard. So they have a right to freedom of speech, they must speak it. Because you can say by speaking properly, they are actually creating a moral force. They are creating a public opinion, they are creating a public pressure. So even if the government does not heed, well, they will try to make people aware about some problem that the policy may have. So we believe as an ethics person, not necessarily as a government here, that we say that if you think that there is something right and wrong, then it is your duty to tell people about your opinion. Or maybe I as a public have a right to know what you feel about this thing. Because that will make me to understand the policy better and make a better judgment, autonomous decision. So that is why because the truth is such an important thing, that if I think that something is truth, then I owe it to the society to tell it. Whether society accept that or not, that is not the question. But it is my duty to tell people that, okay, this is what I believe in. Maybe on the basis of that thing, more people may be convinced. And maybe through that some change can happen. Isn't it? So whether you must differentiate between the two. Freedom to express, tell the truth, and freedom to be heard. So even if government is not hearing them, then also it is important that civil servants should speak. Not civil servants, people should speak what they think it is right. So that is a second more important ethical part of your answer, your question. Is there anything else that I can say? No, it does not lower down the prestige of the post. So speaking is actually, that will actually heighten the prestige of the post, because at least you are telling people, people will know that you know the truth, or your opinion is valuable, even if it is not heard. Sometimes opinions are heard much long after it is expressed. So it will not lower the prestige, it might possibly increase the prestige in the mind of the people who are important there. So it is not. Does not the present policy makers feel any need to paying heed to it ethically? Present policy maker or any other policy maker should pay heed to that. That is an important thing that ethics tells us. But whether they do it or not, that is their choice. They are in the position of power, they can alone decide whether they want to pay heed or not. But if you ask us, so all the four things are there. First of all, well, if I think that there is something wrong, then I should speak, even if I am not heard. Secondly, people have a right to know what I think. Thirdly, it will not lower my prestige if nobody can say listens to me. So speaking is valuable in itself. And finally, well, so government should take heed of that. Whether they do it or not, it is their choice. But good question. Biswajit, sir, some civil servant give tuition other student. Is it conflict of interest? Yes, Biswajit, it is a conflict of interest. So they should not do that again, or they should not take money at least in that. If they are taking it, then that's a violation of a code of conduct. Next question. Sir, if any civil servant want to write a book or making videos, maybe on behalf of education, or unfortunately the book or video becomes top seller book in the market, in this case it is violation of code of conduct. Even if it does not become a top seller in the market, it is a violation of code of conduct. Before writing such a book, a civil servant must take the permission. Again, I am telling you that it is not completely banned. They can write a book or newspaper article also, but before doing that, they should take permission from the government. So being best seller or not, that is besides the question. But they must always take permission before that. Next question, Nimai. Sir, many IAS officers have YouTube channels and earn money from YouTube channels. Nimai, about YouTube channel code of conduct or social media code of conduct does not say anything as of now. We believe that there may be some clarification about that sooner or later. But as of now, code of conduct does not say anything about the social media. But, well, two other things are important here that may apply on social media also. First of all, on social media activity, a civil servant should not write something against the government. Policies of the government, existing policies, that's the second code of conduct I talked about. That is something that they should not do, and they should not earn money from that. So if they are monetizing their social media activity, then they must take the permission from the government before that. If they are not taking permission from the government, then it is a violation of code of conduct and some action can be taken. YouTube channel, ठीक है, sir. Can a civil servant buy a property or flat, Braja? Yes, they can buy a property and flat, but they must inform the government before that. So any such economic activity that they are engaging in large, in fact, there is a code of conduct. I will not make you to write that here. That if the government servant, civil servant buys anything if whose value is more than 15,000 rupees, they must inform the government. Even a washing machine and TV or laptop, for example, they are buying, whose value is more than 15,000 rupees, they must inform the government. Though it is very anachronistic thing, again 15,000 rupees, you know that most of you perhaps might be using a mobile phone that whose value may be more than 15,000 rupees. But code of conduct is that also. Next one, Subham. Sir, who are civil servants? Only IAS, IPS officers, or they include government hospital workers, government doctors, engineers, state government officers, all. Anybody who is working under government's payroll, salary, for example, they are civil servants. Subhasri, thank you. Yes, Subhasri, thank you. Next one, Nimai. Sir, if I become an IAS officer and my senior orders me to do something bad, at this point of time, not obeying his order is violation of conduct. Yes. Only thing that you can do, Nimai, ask for a written order. But if a written order is there with a signature of your senior, then you are bound to follow that. And then after you responsibility, bad and good, bad and good, you must have realized by now is very complicated thing. What is bad for me can be good for you. What is bad for BJP can be good for a Congress government. Isn't it? So bad and good, who is going to decide what is bad and good? So a civil servant should not decide the bad and good. Let bad and good should be decided by the government of the day. So if there is a written order, then they must always follow that. You must follow that. That is the thing. Nimai, so that is where you answer. Then in next one, I would like to put some personal restriction on the life of a civil servant in a manner. Write down a few lines. Next one, sort of last one. They cannot engage in polygamy. So, as you know that marriage in India is often regulated by the personal law, and in some personal law like Islamic personal law, polygamy is allowed. But as a code of conduct, this even Muslims, for example, should not engage in a second marriage in a polygamous relationship. No second marriage is allowed. That is what code of conduct requires them to adhere to. Comma, write down further. They should neither demand nor accept dowry. They should neither demand nor accept dowry. So, dowry is even otherwise illegal in India, but Civil Service Code of Conduct puts extra demand on civil servants not to demand, not to accept any dowry. Now, this is where another question that was asked earlier, I think by someone, should be taken up once again. Braja had asked the question earlier that if in the wedding, father-in-law gives his son-in-law a Mercedes car, then do we need to avoid it? It will be a dowry also. Indeed, so that Mercedes car may be an example of a dowry that they should avoid. So they should not accept, not even request, not even accept that. So even if the dowry is given voluntarily, for example, then as a civil servant they should avoid that. They should not accept it. So taking that Mercedes car from your father-in-law, for example, may be violation of these two code of conduct. Gift wala also is no longer a minor gift, and dowry also, it is a dowry that is illegal also. So that will be the thing. Comma, write down further. They should display should display secular behavior. They should display secular behavior. So even in their personal life, a civil servant should not discriminate with the people, against the people on the basis of the religion, etc. So secular behavior is one important thing that they should engage in. Next one. Comma, write down further. They should not employ the children. They should not employ the children below the age of 14. They should not employ the children below the age of 14 as domestic servant. So that is the Next, child labor even otherwise is illegal, but in code of conduct there is a special restriction that a civil servant should not engage in a child labor, should not employ the children in there, even domestic servant also. That is one thing. Comma, write down further. They should observe courtesy. They should observe courtesy. So the idea here is that in the private life also, when they are interacting with the people, then they should we can say talk with the public also, even in the private life with courtesy and politeness. They should not appear to be arrogant, because power often make people arrogant, and civil servants are powerful in their things that they can do in the society. So they should not be arrogant because of the power that is given to them by the government. They must be polite, they must be humble, they must be courteous with the people when they are talking to them. That is one thing. Comma, write down further. And they must prohibit the sexual harassment of women employees at the workplace. So, sexual harassment is another important thing that code of conduct requires a civil servant to refrain from. So, these are some of the restrictions of civil service on the private life also. So, code of conduct does not only regulate the official and the public life, it also seeks to regulate the private life of a civil servant also to a great extent. So, these are some of the important code of conduct. Or one more, last one. They should promote and ensure the observance of these code. They should promote and ensure the observance of these codes. Promote and ensure the observance of these codes by their subordinate civil servants as well. By their subordinate civil servants as well. So that is the next important thing, that if a civil servant is working under supervisory position, when somebody else is working directly under them, then the civil servant is required not only to follow these code of conduct, but to ensure that their superior, can say subordinate also follow the code of conduct as well. This is leadership role that you can say, ensuring others also to follow these code of conduct as much as they possibly can. So these are some of the important code of conduct that civil servants are expected to work under in their public, private and professional life in a way. So that is how we understand this thing. Now let me see, a few questions are there. Anirvan had asked the question, sir, the code of conduct related to gifts and purchase of thing only applies to civil servants or to their spouse or family members as well? Only to the civil servant. Code of conduct, well, that will be extremely unethical. You cannot ask your spouse, for example, not to have a business. Suppose, for example, Anirvan, your wife or somebody's husband, for example, wants to start a business. How can the government ask them not to do that? So it is their life again. So these code of conduct are applied only on the civil servant. But one thing that civil servants should do is that we will discuss at the next topic, that whenever there is some activity done by their spouse or any other family member, they must inform the government about that. We will discuss that in the next topic also. Next question, Vidisha. Vidisha has asked, sir, can a Muslim civil servant do polygamy? Civil code of conduct requires them not to do that. Though it is a little controversial whether, but most often you can say, practically you can say Muslims often also do not engage in polygamous relationship. So that is only a theoretical thing that is allowed for the Muslims. Majority of the Muslims, a huge majority, vast majority of Muslims normally don't engage in polygamy. So normally it does not happen. Code of conduct requires them not to engage in that. If they do that, then after there can be a special provision for that. They can seek the government direction on that. But they should avoid polygamous relationship. Another question, Baja, after getting written order, if I implemented that, after implementing it, if violation happens, Violence, I think you mean. In a specific community, then who will be responsible for that? The person who has given you the written order. That's why it is important to have a written order. So if anything wrong happens after that, then you are not responsible. You can simply say, I followed the order. So the person who gave you the order will be responsible, not you. As I told you in yesterday's class, obedience, in obedient action, the commander is responsible, not the obedient person. If you obey blindly, for example, then responsibility does not lie with you. Responsibility lies with the person who has given the command, written command. There is evidence for that. So now, these are some of the important, there are a large number of other code of conduct also, but these are some of the most important one which I think that you should know in order to understand the nature of civil service as well as to write some case studies also on that. Now, about these code of conduct, you know that there is one controversy is there normally. Controversy, that is not controversy maybe, there is one question is often asked about this. Tell me one thing, if there is a question in your exam that do you think that these code of conduct are the violation of the rights and liberty of fundamental rights maybe of a civil servant? Because you know that many of these code of conduct do appear to be a violation of the fundamental right. For example, not able to write in a newspaper. Not able to write in the news. That's violation of freedom of expression, Article 19(1)(a) of your constitution. So, in this case, now can say if there is a question that are these code of conduct violation of liberty, fundamental right of a civil servant or not? What should be your answer? Well, your answer should be unqualified no. That these code of conducts are not a violation of though it is a restriction. These code of conduct are restriction on the you can say liberty of a civil servant, not a violation. What is the difference between violation and restriction? Basic difference between them is, well, consent. So any restriction on the I can say limitation on the liberty without consent is called violation, and with consent is called restriction. Restriction is morally justified, violation is morally unjustified. So in a classroom, if I am in a physical classroom, if we are in front of each other, then you don't have the freedom of expression even in a classroom. You cannot start talking to each other in the classroom. Is that a violation of your liberty in the classroom? Of course not. It is a restriction which is ethically justified because it is based on your consent. So when you decide and agree to become a civil servant and sign on a document acceptance letter, then after, well, you agree that you are willing to work under these restrictions. So it is your duty now to ensure that you follow these. And if you do not want to follow these code of conduct, resign from the civil service and exercise your liberty. Nobody is forced to be a civil servant in our country. We are a democratic country in that sense. So if there is a question on that do these code of conduct violate the liberty of a civil servant, then you should say no, it is not. It is only a restriction because it is based on the consent of the civil servant. So that is one important thing. Now Vidisha has asked another question. So some of these code of conduct are very similar to our fundamental duties, and a civil servant will obviously know his fundamental duties. Thus, what was the need of describing them separately? Fundamental duties are first of all legally non-enforceable. So somebody who violates fundamental duty, then there cannot be a punishment for that. These are legally enforceable. So government can actually take action against a civil servant. And only some of these code of conduct are a part of fundamental duty, not all of them. So being apolitical is not a fundamental duty, isn't it? So civil servants have a more specific set of, can say, legally enforceable duties in a way. Fundamental duty, Article 51(a) is legally not enforceable. They are not punishable by law. That is the basic thing. Now, as we have seen earlier, that code of conduct has become more controversial in the more recent time because of the increasing importance of the liberty in the modern society. Because of that, you can see that today many people are talking about more about the what we can call code of ethics. So let's briefly talk about code of ethics also here. Code of conduct. What is the difference between, say, code of conduct and code of ethics? Two differences we can simply think of. First of all, code of conduct is about exact behavior, as we have seen just now. That code of conduct tells you do this and don't do that. Exact behavior that you are expected to follow or not to follow. Code of ethics, on the other hand, is not about behavior, but it is more about certain values that the civil servants are expected to adhere to. So, value, we'll see the meaning of that shortly, some examples. Secondly, you can see that code of conduct is punishable by law. Code of ethics, on the other hand, is, as of now, not punishable by law. So, you can value and behavior, punishment or lack of punishment. These are the two important things you can write on that topic, what it is. So, that is how the two difference. Now, many people say that now the time has come when we should move from a conduct-based civil service to an ethics-based civil service. So, let us de-emphasize on the code of conduct, because code of conduct, as we have seen earlier, is a type of paternalistic concept. So, in making code of conduct, the government is acting like a father and civil servants are treated like a child who must be told do this and don't do that. So, that is the one thing here. It is a paternalistic idea. So, that is why you can say these days we often talk about code of ethics more vigorously in a way, more importantly in a way. So, what is that code of ethics? If you look at the code of ethics, for example, then one of the most important, in order to understand what are the code of ethics, the first and most important, not first maybe, but a most important attempt to identify the code of ethics for civil service was done in early 90s in UK, Britain, where a committee was formed under Lord Nolan, which is called as known as, of course, Nolan Committee. Nolan Committee, and Nolan Committee gave its report in 1994, almost 30 years ago, 29 years ago. And Nolan Committee report had said that civil service in Britain should be based on, well, 7 important values. There are 7 values that should define the civil service of Britain. And in India, our ARC report tells us that these are the 7 values or British system we should follow in India as well, because Indian civil service is basically formulated on the ground of the British system. So, we should follow the British system as far as. So, these 7 values that Nolan Committee talks about is also considered as the central value of the civil service in India as well. So, let us briefly talk about these values. I will not make you to write anything on that. You can Google out these Nolan Committee report, you can get all of that, or ARC report also you can simply go through. You can find these Nolan Committee reports. So, let us briefly talk about these 7 values which form the basis of the civil service in India. First important value is selflessness. The idea here is that a civil servant must always act in a selfless manner. So, any action done by the civil servant, taken by a civil servant, must not involve any self-interest. That is the first important. Even if you are doing something that fulfills the public interest, but at the same time it benefits you personally, then you should refrain from that action, change your decision, remove your self-interest into that. No self-interest should be involved in the activities of a civil servant, number 1. Second important value is called integrity. Integrity we have been talking about in our class since the beginning of our course itself. But here, how do we define integrity? We simply define integrity as a civil servant must always avoid any conflict of interest. We have talked about that in yesterday's class. So, conflict of interest always violates our integrity. So, they should avoid any conflict of interest. That is the second important thing. Third important thing is objectivity. The idea here is that a civil servant are expected, say they must take all their decision only and only on the basis of fact, not on the basis of their intuition, impulse, personal liking, disliking, or stereotype, prejudice, social influence, etc., etc. Because our decisions, as we have discussed throughout our class, may be because of many of these factors. Impulse, intuition, etc., or prejudice or stereotype, or you can say the mental shortcuts that we have, attitude, our personal attitude, social influence, etc. They should not act on the basis of these things. Again, they must take decisions only and only on the basis of fact. That is the meaning of the term objectivity. Fourth important value is accountability. Accountability means what? Accountability essentially means that civil servant must always be ready to be held accountable for their actions. So whatever they are doing, they must be ready that somebody somewhere sometimes can ask a question from them. What did you do that? Why did you do that? And they should be ready with the answer. So that being prepared with the answer to give to the other people, well, that is what we call the accountability. They should always be ready to be held accountable for their decision or their actions. Fourth. Fifth one is called openness. Openness here has two meanings from us again. First of all, whenever a civil servant takes a decision, they must always record their decision. They must always record their decision in a documentary format. Some sort of, you can say, documentation must be done. So they cannot depend on their memory, because whatever they are doing today, maybe 10 years later, question can be asked, what did you do there? And they cannot depend on their memory for long. So every decision that they have taken, decision, fact about that decision, all these things must be properly recorded in the form. Documentation. Idea is that there should be proper documentation of every action. They should not take impulsive decision and move ahead. No, everything must be written down in the form of a file, in the form of some electronic format, whatever is appropriate in that particular thing. And second meaning of the term openness here is that after recording it, to whatever extent law permits, it must be put in public domain. It must be put in public domain. So that is the next important thing. So if the law does not, so sometimes laws are there, official secret, for example, you cannot put everything in public domain. So, but if the law does not prohibit it, then every information that they have, it must be put in public domain. And even those information which is not to be put in public domain, they must be recorded, documented properly. Proper documentation is an important part of code, I can say, code of ethics. Fifth one. Sixth one is called honesty. Honesty means what? We have discussed honesty in some detail in our earlier class. I hope you remember in our class on trustworthiness, when I differentiated between integrity and honesty. There we had seen that honesty is the external aspect and integrity is the internal aspect. What you have inside you is integrity, and what you show to the other people is your honesty. So both of them are the two sides of the same coin. Here, what does it mean? Here, honesty basically means that disclose any conflict of interest. Yesterday, if you remember, we had talked about, towards the end of this conflict of interest topic there, we had said that any conflict of interest, a civil servant must always disclose. The disclosure of a conflict, they should avoid it for the first of all, and well, if they cannot avoid it, then they must disclose it. So any conflict of interest that they have in their personal life, that must be properly disclosed to the people. For example, somebody had asked this question earlier, that suppose you are a civil servant and your spouse, your husband or wife has a business. Now you cannot ask them not to have a business, but you must disclose that to the government that my spouse has a business in my family. We have a family business also. Or my spouse, husband or wife is a daughter of a politician. So whatever, that will create a conflict. So any such conflict of interest, if they have, they should avoid it as far as possible. But if it is not avoidable, then after they must disclose it to the government. So that is the meaning of the term honesty here. Be honest about your personal life. Sixth one. And the seventh one is called leadership. Seventh is called leadership. Leadership here, we have discussed a lot about leadership in our class earlier, but leadership here simply means that they should follow these code of ethics in such a manner that they should become an example for others to follow. So leadership essentially means leading by example. Civil servant must always lead by example. That is the meaning of the term, you can say, leadership here. So these are the 7 important value system that every civil servant is expected to follow. The idea here is that what I would suggest here, that if you remember in one of my class earlier, we had talked about the example of Benjamin Franklin. There we had seen that Benjamin Franklin made a diary in which he talked about 13 values. virtues, and every day he used to evaluate his life, his day on the basis of those values. I will suggest here that a civil servant must also have a similar diary, and in that similar diary, instead of having the 13 row, they should have only 7 rows. And whenever they are taking a decision, they must ensure that how many of these are being violated. Suppose, for example, you are taking a decision. Well, check whether, well, any self-interest is involved. Suppose no. It means that you have ticked that. Integrity, tick that. Objectivity, find a tick. Suppose accountability is not there. Change your decision. And then after make it tick. All the 6 must always be tick. If all the 7 are ticks here, then after, well, with confidence, do whatever you have to do. You can never do a wrong. So as a civil servant, if these 7 ticks are there in any decision that you have taken, then after there cannot be any question mark on your decision ever. So this is what every civil servant should. This is how they should try to keep their life simple, conflict free and good. So this is what is basically the idea of the code of ethics for civil service here. So that is all about the code of ethics. Let me see. Spandan has asked a question. Sir, sometimes we can see in a function SP DM of a district and MP MLA taking part as a special guest. It is a violation of the code of conduct. Not necessarily, Spandan. It depends on in what capacity the SP or DM is there. So if SP and DM is there as a political, because in every function there are political functionary and there are bureaucratic functionary. So as an official against a person, he has been invited there, then he can go there. But otherwise he can go there as a civil servant only, but not as a politician, not as a participant as such. So it depends on what is the context in which he is participating there. So sometimes civil servants are de facto, can say, the ex officio head of certain organization. Then as a member of the organization, they can be invited. So that is something that they can do. So these are the main thing that we have to. So this is all about the governance part also that I had planned to study with you. And along with that, there are many other parts of your syllabus we have done at different places. For example, there was a question, there is a topic in your exam, in your syllabus that say things like rules, law, or we can say the conscience or convention. Rules, laws, conscience or convention, etc. as a guide of the human behavior. Now we have discussed all of that in our class. Rule we have discussed in utilitarianism, law we have discussed in the introduction class itself, conscience we have discussed in the Kantian class, that voice of reason, sapre ode, apadipu bhava, that is what we call the conscience. And convention we have discussed in the previous class, we will discuss the normative conformity. So that is what conventions are. One important topic is that ethical issues in international relation. We have discussed that with reference to the Kantian theory and its implication. So 5 important ethical issues we have discussed there: human rights, can say the promotion of democracy, or can say international cooperation. 4th, we have talked about international trade and respect for the national sovereignty. So these are the important ethical issues in the international relations today that we have talked about. Then another important topic in your course is work culture. Work culture. Work culture we have discussed throughout the emotional intelligence class. So a good work culture must include most of the emotional intelligence, like respect for diversity, leadership, empathy, commitment, innovation, initiative. So these are the important part of the good work culture in a way. So many of these topics we have already discussed in our class earlier. So try to think of how many of them. RTI I will not discuss in my class, that you might have done in your paper 2 governance part also. So most of the topic that is there in your syllabus that we have done. Let me see, there is a question. Nimai sir, somewhere I heard that if a relative went to sit in UPSC exam, then that civil servant need to give information to UPSC by saying that one of my relative is going to sit in the UPSC. Sir, how much is it true? Don't worry about that. There is not code of conduct. I am not much aware about that, but don't worry about this. This thing you will know when the time comes. Oh, so the same question. So that is all about the topics that we have discussed. Now rest of the day today class today we will devote to the case study. How can remember case studies are very simple. If you remember, understand everything that we have discussed till now in our class, then it will be very easy for you to answer virtually any case study that the UPSC can possibly ask. So let us briefly talk about some case study, some idea of a case study in this class. After the break, we will talk about the actual case studies. So, case studies first of all. Now, if you look at the case studies, for example, all the case studies that can be possibly asked, then we can say that theoretically speaking, at least, there can be two types of case study, though there is a third subtype also that we will talk about later. But ideally, there can be two types of case study in a way. Let's briefly talk about them. First type of case study, I like to call that as decision making case study. And the second type is what I like to call them as problem solving case study. Decision making case study or problem solving. Let's talk about both of them briefly in this class today. Now, if you look at decision making case study, then as the name itself tells us that in this case study what happens, that there is a situation is given to you, and in this situation it appears that you have more than one course of action. You can do this also, that also, that also, and that also, and you have to make a decision in favor of one of the choice that is available to you, rejecting the rest. So that is what we call the decision making. Decision making, as you all know, is essentially about the ethics. Ethics is basically about decision making in a way. So when decision making case study comes up, then your mind should go to the philosophy part of our course that we discussed in the first 7, 8, 9 days maybe. When we will discussing philosophy and different theory, I will come back to you shortly on this. So I will come back to this one, how we can answer that. So this is one type of case study. Second type of case study is called problem solving case study, where the name itself tells us that in this case study there is no confusion or doubt as such. There is no difficulty, there is no, can say, dilemma that what is right and what is wrong. In the first case, there was a dilemma what was right and what was wrong. In the second type of case study, there is no dilemma, there is no question of right and wrong. Right is clear, wrong is clear. So in this case, what you have to do, that not to identify what is right and wrong, but to do the right thing or prevent the wrong or correct the wrong. So problem solving case study can be of three types further: how to do the right thing, how to prevent the wrong, and how to correct the wrong. So that is what we call problem solving case study. And problem solving case study, as you can appreciate here, is basically about the psychology part. So whenever you find a problem solving type of case study, then your mind should go to the psychology part of our course. Like, for example, you should think about emotional intelligence, we should think about the social influence, particularly the normative conformity, minority influence, etc., even obedience, or you can think about the attitude, particularly about persuasion. So problem solving case study, we have to use emotional intelligence, all the emotional competencies that we have discussed. I will give you some example of that shortly. Then after normative conformity, minority influence, obedience, and persuasion, etc. All of these are the psychology part of your course. So problem solving case studies are very easy, as you can appreciate from this. So only thing that you need to do is to remember everything that we discussed in the classroom. Every line that I dictated you in the classroom or that I discussed with you in the classroom, you should be aware of that. Remember that. It is basically the test of memory, understanding plus memory. So in this case, we can say your memory is important. You must remember every single word, every single sentence that I made you to write in my class here, and try to see that how can we use, how many of them you can use in your answer. We'll see some example of that. But be very sure, if you remember all of them, then these are the very simple case studies. They are not very difficult as such. These are a little tricky because here dilemma is there. Dilemma are more difficult to handle than the problems in that sense. So I will tell you that how can we handle the decision making case study now. Now, if you look at the decision making case study, then I may suggest to you that whenever you get some decision making type of case study, then you should try to follow some steps that I am going to talk about. I will give you some stepwise procedure, sort of formula, a prototype, that if you follow this formula, this prototype in a way, then it will be very easy for you to answer virtually any case study that can be asked in this topic here. So let's talk about that formula now. Though it is very preposterous for me to say that I can give you a formula for ethics, but let us still talk about that. And all these steps that I am going to talk about will be based on one important theory of ethics that we had discussed in our philosophy class earlier. So let us talk about what are these theories. Now, whenever you get a case study like this, first important step should be to, for example, give a brief description of the case. Give a brief description of the case, particularly involving the ethical dilemma. Particularly involving the ethical dilemma. So, every case study will have one central ethical dilemma. Identify what is that and describe that. But it must be as brief. Don't copy the whole question. Give a very brief of that. What is the case? It should not be more than 20, 25, 30 words. Within that, you have to summarize the thing. I will tell you some example of that, how we can do that. First. Second important step after that you should do is that explore all the alternatives that you have. Explore all the alternatives that you have in front of you. Which theory of ethics will say that this should be the beginning of a decision making process? I hope you remember existentialism. So existential will say, thinkers will say that you must exercise your freedom first. That is one thing that you need to do. So when you explore your alternative, then remember the basic thrust of the existential philosophy, that man is always free. So while exploring that, exercise your freedom. Never think that you have no choice. So be as creative as possible, be as innovative as possible in exploring your alternatives. Think out of the box. Do not limit yourself to the obvious choice like yes or no. Remember, yes and no is never the right choice. So explore as many of the possibilities that you can possibly do. That is the second thing. We'll see some example of that. Third important thing is, well, after exploring each case alternative that you have, make a proper cost-benefit analysis. Make a proper cost-benefit analysis of these alternatives. Which theory will say that this should alone be the choice decision-making criteria? Well, utilitarians will say. So according to utilitarian philosophy, that, well, every choice must be done on the basis of a proper cost-benefit analysis. Take that as a part of your thing. So each case must be properly analyzed in terms of the cost and benefit. Further, you can see here, but remember, when you make the cost-benefit analysis, then you must remember the basic thrust of the utilitarian philosophy. What was that? That, well, everybody's happiness must be given an equal value. Nobody's happiness is more important than that of anyone else. So, even a criminal, even a terrorist, even a murderer, for example, their interest must be included into the utilitarian calculus. Nobody should be excluded from the calculation of the cost and benefit. Everything must be, everybody, his happiness, his interest must be a part of utilitarian calculus. So, cost-benefit analysis is one thing. Then after, on the basis of the cost-benefit analysis, make a tentative choice. make a tentative choice. But remember, the choice made on the basis of cost-benefit utilitarian analysis must be tentative choice. It should not be the final choice. Why so? Because we often say in ethics that utilitarianism is a very good theory to start your answer with, but it is a very bad theory to end your answer with. So this is how we often explain that. Why it is a good theory to start your answer with? Because utilitarianism gives you that objectivity in your mind. Everybody must be that non-judgmental, objective, impartial mindset. It allows you to look at every situation in an objective manner. So that is a good theory to start your answer with, but it can be a bad theory to end your answer with. Why so? Because utilitarianism can be extremely unjust sometimes, as we had seen. So in a utilitarian philosophy, a Christian can be killed also for the sake of entertainment of 20,000 people. Or a young girl, innocent young girl, can be tortured also for the sake of saving the life of 100 people maybe. Remember these cases we have discussed in our utilitarian class? So that can be extremely unjust sometimes. So it's a very bad theory. You should never end your answer with utilitarianism. You should start it because it will give you objectivity, impartiality, non-judgmental character of your mind. That is why it must be a tentative choice only. It should not be the final choice. Then after, fifth thing I will say that evaluate the above choice on 3 criteria. Let's call them as 3 ethical criteria. Evaluate that on 3 ethical criteria. What are these 3 criteria? These are the important things that you should check. First important criteria is that, does this choice violate somebody's natural rights or not? Natural rights or not. I call that, as you can say, the universal ethical value. Ethical value or personal integrity. You must act as a human being first. Universal ethical value. How do you know somebody's natural rights is being violated? Use the Kantian dictum. What was that Kantian dictum? That never treat a person merely as a means. So, is somebody in your choice is being used merely as a means? If yes, is a wrong choice, go for the next one. So in that case, you can see that should you torture that young girl in order to save the life of somebody else? Well, no, because it will be violation of her ethical rights, her natural rights. We are using that young girl merely as a means to achieve the end of saving some people's life. So always use the Kantian dictum that is somebody used merely as a means or not. That is the first important. Then after, second thing is that think of does your choice violate your consent or not? And what is the most important consent that you have given in your public life? Well, most important consent that you have given in your public life is the professional consent. So permanent consent. That there are 2 consent permanently that we have given in our private life, marriage, and public life, profession. So 30 years of your life you are going to spend as a professional, as a civil servant, for example, 35 years maybe. So that will be your consent here. So I like to call them that always uphold the professional value. Professional value or professional integrity. So for example, check whether this choice that you have selected earlier, does it violate a professional code of conduct or not? If it violates a code of conduct, then don't do that. As a private citizen, I can do that possibly. I am not bound by the civil service code of conduct. But you as a civil servant should not violate that. So if the choice that you have tentatively selected is against a code of conduct, then don't do that. Go for the next choice. Reject that choice. That is the second important thing. And third important value that I often talk about, we call that as rather solidarity. Solidarity. Now, what is solidarity? I did not discuss solidarity as a theory of ethics in our earlier class, philosophy class. There is a whole theory of ethics based on solidarity called communitarianism. But let's not talk about that. Let me give you a brief idea of the solidarity. Solidarity basically means that we all are a member of many groups in our life, like family, caste, religion, nation, etc. And that brings us closer to some people who are members of our group and not so close to the others. So we have certain obligation towards the people who belong to our group. That obligation is called the obligation of solidarity. So for example, I have certain special duty towards my daughter which I do not have towards anybody else. I have a special obligation towards my mother which I do not have towards any other lady in the world. So there is a solidarity in a way because they are close to us, I love them, and so they are the close people to us, and well, it is our duty. So whatever duty that you have towards your family members, your friends, your relatives, people belonging to your caste and religion, if you believe in that, then that is called obligation of solidarity. In a way, I like to call that as social value. So that is where. So the way, in a way, you can say we have three obligations in our life: ethical obligation, universal; professional obligation, our job; and social obligations, well, people closer to us, our friend and family, etc. So there are three important obligations. We should follow most of all of them. Now, life would be very good if all these three obligations are followed properly. But problem occurs in the life when there is a conflict between these three obligations. That is why most of the dilemma that you can find in your case study will be about a conflict between them. That ethical issues, professional value, and the social value. Ethical obligation, professional obligation, and the social obligation. Ethical integrity, professional integrity, and the social integrity. So these are the three important values are there. Conflict between them often creates moral dilemma for us. Now here also I will give you a formula how can we handle that dilemma. Whenever you have such a dilemma like this one, then you should remember that this is very important for us. We all are social people and we do have a social obligation that we should fulfill as much as we possibly can. So it is very important, no doubt about that. But remember that professional obligation is more important and ethical obligation is the most important. So there are the three important obligations and this is the hierarchy that you should keep in mind. So you can violate the social obligation for the sake of professional obligation, not the vice versa. You can violate the professional obligation for the sake of ethical obligation, not the vice versa. So if you keep this hierarchy in the mind, then you will see that it will become very easy for you to answer virtually any case study. Not only case study, it will help you to lead a very ethical life also as a prospective civil servant later. Let's take one example. I hope that many of you might be watching Hindi films and all. Almost 50-60 years ago maybe, there was a Hindi film that had come that Amitabh Bachchan, that had made Amitabh Bachchan the superstar that he became later on. I hope that many of you may have seen that film, Diwar. Many such films you can find, such stories you can find where this conflict is shown. Let's talk about Diwar, because that was a very famous film. Mere paas maa hai wala dialogue it is famous for that dialogue maybe. Now, in that film, if you remember, that one important character of that film, I think his name was Ravi in the film, role played by Shashi Kapoor there. He was a police officer. Now, he was given a case by his boss to handle. Now, when he looked at the detail of the case, then suddenly he realized that one of the important criminal in that case was his elder brother, role played by Amitabh Bachchan. Vijay was perhaps his name in that film. Now, when he came to know, and he loved his brother a lot. Now, when he came to know, first of all, that his brother is the criminal in that case, then he was first of all very disturbed. Then after, it will create a conflict of interest that you as a police officer is going to handle a case in which your brother is a convict, is a criminal, accused at least. So it will create a conflict of interest. So as I told you yesterday that as a rule, he tried to recuse himself from that. He told his boss, sir, in this case my brother is involved, so please do not ask me to handle this case, give this case to somebody else. But his boss insisted upon that, no, you must take this case. He took up that case. After taking up that case, do you know what was the first thing that he did? He made a letter, he wrote a letter first of all, and he went to his brother and asked him that, please brother, sign on this letter. What was that letter? This was a letter of confession. So in this letter, his brother, if he signed on that, then he would accept that I am a criminal, I belong to a certain gang, I have done all these wrong, and I accept that I have done something wrong. I surrender myself with the police, and I assured police that I will help the police to find other criminal in my gang. So the you can say Shashi Kapoor told his brother Amitabh Bachchan, for example, sign on this document, become a state approver, become our helper, and I will ensure that you will not be given any punishment. By doing this, he was trying to help his brother in that case. Was there anything wrong in that? Of course not. Because, well, every criminal has a right in that case that if you belong to a particular gang, you can surrender to the police, and then after, well, police will become lenient, and you can help the police to find other criminals, become a prover, helper of the government in that case, and then government becomes lenient to you about the wrong that you have done. So by doing all of that, he tried to help his brother out of the criminal activity that he was in. Was that wrong? There was nothing wrong in that. He had an obligation as a brother which he tried to fulfill. So there is nothing wrong in that. But his brother did not agree to sign on that. Then after, so when his brother refused to sign on that confession letter, then after, well, he went against his brother. And towards the end of the film, he actually killed his brother as well. Now this is important here. Idea here is that you are a brother also and you are a police officer also. If there is a conflict between your duty as a brother and your duty as a police officer, which duty is more important? Well, your duty as a police officer is more important than your duty as a brother. So even if you love your brother, for example, but if your brother is a criminal, then as a police officer, it is your duty to arrest him and give punishment to that. So the idea is that we are a human being first, we are professional second, and we are social being third. This hierarchy is very important that you should keep in your mind. If you keep this in mind, because as a police officer or as a bureaucrat sometimes, you may have to take action against your brother also, your sister also, your spouse also, your father and mother also, and your friends and relatives also. So you must always recognize that you are a police officer first, you are a bureaucrat first. Being social obligation is a secondary thing that you should try to take care of. So you can help your brothers and sisters as long as it is not violating the code of conduct that you are expected to do that, follow. So these are the three important obligations, and this is the hierarchy in which they should be remembered. So that is the next number. So this is how you can evaluate this tentative choice, each of them on the basis of these three ethical criteria. Then after, make a final choice on the basis of all of that. So by taking all these three into consideration, take a final choice. And so that is the final. And then after last, I will may suggest to you that take a complete responsibility of your choice. Which theory of ethics will say responsibility makes your action moral? Well, again, existentialism. So take the complete responsibility, that is existential choice. How can you take the responsibility? Well, for that I will suggest to you that whenever the question is from you, then your answer must be from I. Always use the word I when the question is from you. I shall do that. I have seen many students who hesitate from using the term I sometimes. They often use the third person, like one should do that or it should be done, something like this. No, use the word I shall do that. Be authoritative. Because by using the term I, you are showing to the examiner that you are confident about your decision and you are willing to own your decision. You are willing to, well, take the responsibility of that decision, which is a very important part of ethical decision making process. So that is the next important thing that we should do. So that is how these things are. So if you remember these points again, then it will be much easier for you to answer virtually any question of case study, decision making type of case study. So the idea here is that how should your answer look like? Think of it. Your answer should look like something like, first of all, well, suppose this is your answer, number one, then describe your, can say, case, introduction. That should be introduction. Then after you can write there that in this situation I have the following choices. Following choices. Choice number one, write down your choice. What is that? Then after talk about the merit of that choice, benefit, say 1, 2, 3, and suppose demerit of that choice. Suppose 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Now in this case, merit appears to be less than the demerit, so or demerits are more than the merit, so reject this choice. I will not select this choice. It is rejected. But before rejecting it, tell why you are rejecting, because demerits are more, or they are more profound, they are more problematic. Then after, write the second choice that you have. Then again, write about the merit of that. Say 1, 2, 3, for example, demerit of that. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, reject that also because the merits are more than the merit. Then after, maybe third choice. Write down what your choice, then after write down the merit of that. Say 1, 2, 3, 4, and say demerits, for example, 1, 2, 3. Here merits are more, so you will select this choice. So that is how your answer should look like. Describe a question, at least 3 choices you must talk about. To reject that and finally find a better third way out. Your answer should be at least. You can explore more also, 4, 5, 6 also, but at least 3 must be explored properly here. That is one thing that you can do here. So that is how we can make the choices here. That is how your answer should look like. We will discuss some of the case study in the next class after the break, that what can be those case study, how can we use these ideas in order to write the exact good answer. So these are the important things that we will discuss. So we'll take some examples in the next class after the break. We'll take a break of some time.